Hi, this is Brian Kramer, host of Retail TV and author of Human to Human. Maria Twina has always lived between two worlds. As the child of first-generation immigrants, she was well aware that life at home was all about how to be a good member of the community and how to contribute to the collective. While outside the home, she picked up on all the signals about the value of American individualism and self-reliance. Today, Maria heads up the Consumer X practice at Ninth Wonder, where she helps brands bridge that hybrid space between cultures. With warmth and empathy, she shares some key insights for marketers about how multilingual and multicultural marketing really works, why you might be missing these moments in your general marketing programs, and how to create experiences that speak to your audience in the ways that matter. Maria, it is so wonderful to see you here. As I mentioned before we got on camera, I've spent so much time getting to know you that by the time we're here, I'm elated to actually get to interview you. And I'm looking forward to just diving into all this great material. So thank you so much for being on Retail TV.
Oh, thank you. I'm excited about being here. Appreciate the opportunity to chat with you guys.
Yeah. Well, let's just dive right in.
Okay.
Most of the time, we on Retail, we try to keep the background of how folks came to their current marketing role really brief. But in your case, the story of how you came to focus on multicultural marketing is so extraordinary. I'd love for you to share your story.
Oh, sure. So I'll go way back. Okay. So I was born to an immigrant family. I was born in Miami. My mother was Cuban. My father was from Spain. And he was a civil engineer. They were Cuban refugees. He was a civil engineer, so he got work in New Orleans. And I grew up in New Orleans in the 60s and the 70s in a very typical Hispanic first-generation immigrant household where the parents spoke to us in Spanish. My siblings and I returned it in Spanish, but then amongst ourselves, we only spoke English amongst the siblings. And I was taught about the ethos of collectivism, which is the Latino ethos, which is all about community and family over self. Then I would go to school and I was taught in English and I was taught about the American ethos. And, without those words being used, but it was really all about being self-reliant and being independent, not interdependent, which is what I was taught at home to be. And in fact, I tell folks that it took me 40 years to realize this, but when I acted in an independent, self-reliant way growing up, my mother would tell me I was being selfish because she was looking at it through the prism of a collectivist individual. So I had a typical American upbringing in the sense that, I studied here in the US. I studied psychology, I think, to better understand my upbringing. And then I got a graduate degree in communications and I embarked on an advertising career. Yeah, Brian.
How long were you in New Orleans before you actually moved on? Was that all the way through
through graduate school? Yeah. So I didn't move to California till I was 28 years old.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So actually, yeah.
You saw a lot of change.
I saw a lot of change. I felt very alone in New Orleans. There were no minorities within earshot of where I lived. I grew up in a very typical white middle-class neighborhood. And it was very interesting to go to school and feel completely like an outsider. But you kind of bury that when you're growing up. You don't want to feel like an outsider, but I felt like an outsider at home and I felt like an outsider at school. And I didn't have context for it back then, but it was really because the ethos was so different in both scenarios. And, we talk about English as a second language, and we teach that, but we don't teach America as a second culture. And for immigrant families, that's really where the conflict and the chaos, that's the trigger for all of it. So I ended up, after graduate school, working in advertising, spent way too many years doing just general market advertising, 20 years doing general market advertising, worked for some great agencies, big, small. And then about 13 years ago, I came home from the grocery store and my late husband was helping me put up the groceries. And he says, you never buy the brand of anything twice. And I said, really? And he said, yeah. He says, it's not a critique, it's an observation. I'm like, well, what makes you say that? He said, oh, I just read a great report on the Hispanic market. And they say that Hispanics are extremely brand loyal. And my immediate response was, well, whenever you see a study about the Hispanic market, they're never talking about me. They're only talking about my parents. And that conversation shifted my whole career, because after that conversation, I thought, so if I'm not buying because of advertising and brands aren't connecting with me, then if you think about the 4 Ps, which one drives me at the point of purchase to make a purchase? Is it the package? Is it the price? Is it the promotion? And I started doing research at night on my own, just like thinking, what is happening? Why aren't brands talking to us? And this was in the midst of, I don't know if you remember MySpace. I know I'm dating myself, but these MySpaces was erupting. Digital was just very nascent, but starting to explode. And I started asking around. I asked my relatives, are you guys brand loyal? You know, folks that had grown up like me, either born here or had come here at a very early age. And the responses were always the same. No, we're not. And I thought, well, I'm in marketing. How can that be that I'm not focused on people like me? So I started doing research. I was working at McCann at the time, went to New York and told them, I don't want to do what I'm doing anymore. And they were like, well, what do you want to do? I said, I want to focus on the bilingual, bicultural Hispanic market digitally, because no one is focused on this segment. And what I'm seeing is that the growth from the internet is coming from consumers that are bilingual, bicultural, or minorities. And my theory at the time was it's happening because we never see ourselves above the line on TV. So we went online to create content for ourselves, to connect with others that were like us. And for us, TV became secondary and the internet became primary. It is our TV, right? So we did a study. McCann was very supportive. We did a study with MSN Latino back then. And the whole premise of the study is that the bilingual, bicultural consumer is really the target that brands should be focused on, because as children, we become the Sherpas for our foreign-born parents. We translate the language, we interpret the US ethos, which we just talked about. We inform brand and product purchases at a very early age because we have the terminology and the words and the language to support it and to translate and to demystify for our parents. And we demystify products and services all the time. And my theory was, it's not something that stops when you turn 21. We actually will do this our whole life, become influencers, micro-influencers, if you will, within our familial structure and beyond. And research has since proven that as bilingual biculturals, especially the Latinx or the Hispanic community, as they mature, their sphere of influence becomes culturally agnostic, if you will, because they live in two worlds. They live in their American world and in their Hispanic world. So that's how I ended up focused on the bilingual bicultural. And I have been here now for 13 years. And I really embrace this consumer, not only because I lived it, because I'm always learning new things, but because I think it's underserved. They hide in plain sight, yet they yield exponential revenue and fandom for a brand if you let them, if you speak to them.
Wow. All that from shopping.
Yeah, from one shopping incident. It really, you know, and I also think in a much bigger picture, there's something that happens to children of immigrants, and, you know, journals of social psych talk about this, especially with the US born children of immigrants, where they leave, they don't want to be Latino, they don't want to be Hispanic, they don't want to be outsiders. So they kind of leave their homes and their culture, and they, you know, begin their American way of life. And then at some point, it's a process called retroacculturation. They return to their roots, and the return is typically triggered by a key life event, the birth of a child, the death of a parent, purchasing a new home, your first home, you know, a divorce. And something triggers you to go back to your roots. And it's only then, when you go back to your roots, that you fully embrace who you are and you use it to your benefit, not to your deficit. So I think that whole event with the shopping and putting up the groceries was happening here, and at a higher level, I was retroacculturating. And in my case, the event was being hit with the reality that no one speaks to you, yet you're in the marketing world, and you're constantly doing marketing to other folks. So it was a confluence of a couple of things, but I find it very interesting.
I'm curious how that information that you gathered and everything that you put together informed some things that you were able to see play out in whether it was campaigns or creative, and how did that then create some outcomes?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So that research then led to building a practice at McCann at the time where we were just focused on the digital, bilingual, bicultural, and then developed a plethora of best practices on how do you actually engage this consumer. One of the biggest errors that general market brands make is that, oh, they're English language proficient or dominant. So we're reaching them with our general market advertising. I mean, that's always the argument I would get. And my response soon became, you're reaching, you're not touching. Those are two completely different things. Reach is quantitative, touch is qualitative. And you have to touch to make a brand connection that's authentic and real and affective. And that's what drives engagement. So the whole premise of the approach was driven by that knowledge. And it's not just about language, it's about culture. I can give you a couple of examples. I've had a retailer in the past who came to me and said, we translated everything to Spanish. We're targeting a first generation Latina woman, and we haven't seen a lift in sales. It's like, well, what's the message? And the message was, our clothes makes you feel comfortable. And I said, well, that's a message for an American who is independent and self-reliant and dresses for themselves. A first-generation Latina woman would never dress for comfort. They dress for appearances because that's what's paramount, because they're not dressing for themselves. They're dressing for the collective. It's much more of that tribal mentality. So it's not just about the language. You need to understand and deeply discern the cultural insights of that consumer to better serve that consumer's needs. And what's really fascinating to me, which is I've learned over the years, is how based on your acculturation level, the messaging hierarchy changes or is informed by new messages, because we're different, especially the bilingual, bicultural. They're hybrids. I mean, if you think of a spectrum, and you think of a first generation Latino immigrant family, their ethos is all about the collective, okay? And then you go all the way to the other side and you think of your typical American family that's assimilated. They are American, and to be American means that you live by the American ethos, and that's greatly informed by the Protestant work ethic and discipline and frugality and being independent and self-reliant. That's what we value. And in between is this acculturation continuum that takes multiple generations, does not happen in one generation. And that's where you have this bilingual biculturalism and this hybridity and this duality that you need to address. So if this is all about family, the collective, and we are all about self here on the American side, that middle individual should never be messaged about individual this, individual that. It's about family and self. We always see the introduction of self when we ask the bilingual bicultural, what drives you? You ask a first generation, they'll say family. You'll ask an American, they'll say self. You ask a bilingual bicultural, they'll say family and self, which is a perfect reflection of that hybridity.
When you say family, are you also considering community as part of that? And how does that play into the development of a marketing strategy?
Yeah, so definitely community is part of it, because we define family a little differently. It's not just nuclear family where it's the parents and the kids. It's like, the extended family, first cousins, second cousins. Even the terms we use when in America, we say first cousin. In Spanish, when it's your first cousin, you say primo hermano, which is cousin brother, or primo hermana, cousin sister. It even the term brings them closer to you, right? So definitely always think of the community. And one of the things I try to tell brands all the time is forget the model of one-to-one marketing when you're marketing to a Hispanic consumer. Just assume there are many on the other side. Consider a one-to-many approach or one-to-collective approach. Even if you're doing an ad campaign and you're driving folks online and you think you're talking to one individual, leverage their community and the collective while you're in the process. Have the tools there for them to easily share content in Spanish to their relatives and friends that aren't English dominant or proficient, and take advantage of it. You'll get a better ROI. So always think of the community as well, not just the individual.
See, that to me is fascinating. I'd never heard that before. That's not a one-to-one. It's a
Yeah.
one-to-many. I never even knew that. Then I wouldn't have considered that.
Yeah, and actually, we've done some research this last year at Ninth Wonder, where I am now, and our thesis has always been, if the collective if they behave collectively offline, they behave collectively online, and that was proven out in 2 phases of research that we did this year. But it's been happening for years, and what happens. Another perfect example of what happens is the bidirectional toggle, which is a term that if you're in multicultural marketing, you understand. What typically happens in a first generation immigrant household is there's one computer or tablet, and that's where most of the activity happens. And when the parents that are not English language proficient or dominant or internet savvy will typically then ask their kids, regardless of age, I mean, from 10 up, basically, they'll ask them to search for something online because the kids are savvy. So they get online and they search and they find what they're looking for. So the first thing that happens is search, and it happens in English because the kids are doing it. Then when they're on the page, they'll try to find it in Spanish, or they'll try to find an app to translate it, or they will sit and verbally translate the content to the parents. So the second thing that happens is content consumption happens in Spanish. So you have 2 events so far: search in English, content consumption in Spanish. Then if the parents are happy with what they've read or the kids have told them, they give them the credit card and they say, go ahead and make the purchase or sign me up for this. And the kid takes back the computer and executes the e-commerce transaction or whatever the transaction is in English. So what happens from the brand's perspective, General Market gets credit for that campaign, whatever it was, because it happened on the English language side. But the consumer journey was bidirectional. It was bidirectional online because it's what that consumer lives offline. So it's important for brands to tag their pages, especially if they have Spanish pages, and follow that consumer journey to know when this is happening. Because English search, Spanish content consumption, and English e-commerce transaction does not equal General Market success.
You are blowing my mind right now. This is so radically different from the marketing that I know in marketing. I mean, in general sense of marketing, it's so different. Also curious. I'm totally off script here, but
Okay.
but you got me like completely. We'll get back onto it. But how does mobile play into this?
Oh, mobile's a big part of it. I mean, these consumers are all mobile first consumers. They not only are they mobile first consumers, especially the bilingual, bicultural, they over index on mobile apps. And we've known this for years. And I was asked recently, it's so funny you bring that up. I was asked recently by someone, they're like, well, why do you think they over index? And from a psychological perspective, I think they over-index because it allows them to be in control, because we've had to be in control as children.
What do you mean by that, over-index?
Like they actually have more apps downloaded on their phone, right?
Oh, okay.
Than the typical general market consumer, right? And so
that's me.
The reason is we had to be in control as children, I think, from a psychological perspective. So we want control at our fingertips because we always want to have the answers, because we always needed to have the answers for our families.
Wow. Okay. So mobile is a sense of control.
I think so.
Okay. All right. So that's how that plays out. Wow. So cool. All right. Well, do you think that your learnings are specific to Latinxers, to the Latinxer consumers, or are there characteristics that marketers can apply more broadly?
Oh, well, first of all, I don't think it's just a Latinx phenomenon, and I'm using Latinx like I would use Hispanic or Latino. I think this is true of all biculturals, full stop, especially all biculturals that came from a country that English wasn't the native language in the mother country, and collectivism wasn't the ethos. I'm sorry, self-reliance wasn't the ethos. So I'll give you an example, because this was my proof point and remains my proof point of why I think it's a universal truth. I was presenting a couple of years ago to Chrysler, which was my client years ago, and they wanted me to talk about the journey of the 1.5 immigrant, which is the immigrant that's foreign born, but comes to the US at the age of 10 or younger. And they are together with the second generation folks like me that were born here, but our parents are foreign born. The 1.5 and the 2.0 are the bilingual, bicultural, okay? So I was going through a presentation, and when I finished, there was a guy, I said, any questions? And this guy named Robert stood up. I'll never forget it as long as I lived, blonde hair, blue eyes. And he says, Maria, you have told me my whole life story. And I had never stopped to even look at it. I mean, you've opened a window to a whole new world that I have lived and didn't even realize it. He said, I am the US born son of Polish immigrants. He said, I'm going to share something with you that you were the only person in this room that will understand. I said, okay. He said, I bought my first car when I was 10 years old. And I said, I know you did. Because he meant I translated the contract. I interpreted the financial terms. I talked to the sales guy. I negotiated the deal for my father. And he wasn't Latino. So I think it's a universal truth. I really do.
Oh my God, I just got goosebumps.
I still get it every time I tell the story. I get it because I had tears in my eyes when he told me, because he had tears in his eyes too. It was just so, I had never heard it said like that because it was so powerful, but that's what it is. That's exactly what it is.
Do you think how has that affected where you are today with the kind of decisions and growing up that you had to do back then in making those kinds of decisions, in purchasing a car at 10 years old, in becoming an adult at that age? What has that done to inform the kind of person that you've become?
Oh, that's a great question. I wish I knew the answer of how it has informed every aspect of my life, but I know it has. As an adult, I am much more aware all the time of when I'm behaving in a way that I'm worried about what others are going to think, and I've got the collective hat on, versus what I want to do, and I have my self-reliant hat on.
Yeah.
I have seen in my life, and I continue to see when I'm talking to different family members, where they're coming from based on their level of acculturation, which before growing, obviously when you're growing up, you have no context for this. You just know you're battling your parents because, you want to have a sleepover at your friend's house, right? But for them, culturally, that's like, that's incorrect. Why would you sleep at someone's house? You've got your house. You're not homeless. I mean, it's kind of like that type of, it's a different ethos completely. So it's made me much more empathetic and sympathetic to all individuals, because it makes me realize every day that I may be speaking to you right now, but I don't know your journey and how you got here. And we are all behaving based on how we got here, right? And what our journey was.
Isn't that true? Well, kind of just jumping back into the business side of things, historically high tech business to business marketing has been driven by feature and benefits. But even B2B marketing is increasingly about making a connection with people or humans,
right?
Like a buying committee on a human level. Are there ways to apply what we've found on the consumer side to a B2B setting, like sales culture or developer culture or healthcare culture?
Yeah. I think so. Well, I think, we always look at our target audiences and we develop our personas, and we think, okay, sales folks, they're all about networking, they're competitive, developers are data driven, open-minded, and we have all these, psychographic profiles of consumers. But if you're watching them or observing them in social networks or in other areas and seeing what are they consuming? How are they engaging? In the case of the bilingual, bicultural, if you're connected with them on networks, are they consuming content only in English, or are they also consuming content in Polish? I mean, so you can obviously get to a point where you think, okay, looks like this person who I'm targeting from a B2B perspective could also be bilingual, bicultural. Maybe there's a different angle that I can take here. Maybe I can speak to this individual and validate the fact that he or she has had to make multiple decisions their whole life and has navigated for others their whole life. So how do you then market to that individual based on that knowledge? And it's different because it's then understanding that it's not just one-to-one, it's one-to-many, right?
Yeah, that's the part that I'm kind of blown away with, because it's just such a different way of, not that it's Not that I mean, in the old days when it was just radio, TV, and billboards, that's what it was. It was one to many.
Right,
And then over time, digital became more and more one to one, and
right.
as it became more and more personalized.
That's right.
And now, you know, as I like to call it, human to human. But it's from what you're saying, it's a collective because it's a we, and we because you know, we like to think of ourselves as a you know, I don't know if you would call it a tribe or a you know, a community or whatever it is, but we are here together to create this thing, and you need to talk to us.
Right. You need to talk to us. And if you can't speak to us, make sure that you give us the tools so we can easily co-brand for you and share for you. Right. Um, I think it's really important to do that for so many reasons. I mean, it validates that individual on the other side, but it then allows them to co-brand and maybe improve the lives of those around them, demystify, bring them quicker to the product acquisition or whatever they need, and it makes the others feel like I belong here. You know, one of the things we look at all the time is in differences across acculturation levels, and the first generation immigrant many times feels very unwelcome, obviously, you know, in their new country. And the more brands can welcome them by validating them in language and in culture, I think the better the connection, obviously, with that individual. We always have to be culturally and linguistically relevant if we're going to be good marketers, I think.
How does a brand welcome them by being authentic? I mean, without being inauthentic.
Oh yeah, I think yeah, that's key. Great question. Inauthentic to me is always, you know, doing little work and just leveraging stereotypes, and that's always such a mistake. I think in our case for best practices, it's always about if we know this consumer prefers to speak English because they do. Then speak to them primarily in English, but we call it the wink. Wink at them in Spanish or culturally, and use very few Spanish words that make a connection. And I never use the term Spanglish because it minimizes. It's not Spanglish. Spanglish is colloquial and it's different. This is more of what words would resonate with that individual. Is it emotional words like familia, bienvenido, welcome, or is it action verbs? Because many of the bilingual, bicultural, we have conversational knowledge of Spanish, but we're not all biliterate. So you need to be careful of what words to use. And we were raised with our parents telling us, levántate, siéntate, verbs, action words, right? So you need to just get your head in the mindset of what would resonate with this individual that's not stereotypical, and that would tell them, I'm connecting with you. It's like the brand inviting them to their fraternity or their sorority and saying, I get you, I see you, I actually see you, and I see your life experience. And I think
Oh,
it's important.
you're speaking my language. It's all about being seen
Yes,
and heard.
absolutely. Yes.
If you can do that, I think you've solved the world. But you know, it's harder than it seems to do that
Yeah.
across a digital medium, especially.
Right.
But
Right.
I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah.
It's such an amazing thing when you can really truly connect with another individual, or as you're saying, a community.
Yes,
How
absolutely.
how do you think a cult like how are you thinking about culture in helping B2B marketers market to different buyer groups?
Well, I mean, to your earlier point, yeah, there are buyer groups, but there are consumers on the other end of the buyer groups, right? And so what you know, the latest number, and it's changed over the years, is 2044 is when multicultural America becomes the majority minority, and we're already seeing that in in the different age groups, like 16 years or less, they're already the majority. We see it in Gen Z is going to be the most multicultural and diverse cohort we've ever seen. So I think it's starting early to have a mindset of cultural sensitivity, trying not to see everything just through the lens of a self-reliant, independent framework, which is much more rational, and to leverage data, all types of data that we can have, so we can get to the point that it's more custom for that buyer group or that individual, because they need to have that connection. Even if they're buying for a business, it doesn't matter. They need to feel like they're being heard and seen as well. Ultimately, we're selling to a consumer.
So I got to ask this because you're like, it feels to me like you're a data geek and you've gone down the road of data everywhere and you've leveraged data to inform your decisions. And I'm curious then how you leverage data versus gut, because there's so much of it. And when, at what point do you make the decision to say, okay, let's go this direction?
Oh, that's a great question. I am a data geek. I really am. And I had to become that. I mean, going back to when this all started for me, um, it wasn't my gut that told me that I wasn't being spoken to. I mean, I knew it. I was well aware that brands weren't speaking to me, right? But I needed the data to support it. So I'm all for finding, if you have a gut feeling about anything, then doing the work to secure the data to support the gut feeling, right? I mean, as long as you can do that, I think you're in a great place. I try to really stay away from making assumptions and speaking universal truths without actually having data points to support it, even if they're anecdotal. But I think the more we have data to support any gut feeling, it's just easier to package, to sell, to present, and to get a nod at the end that says, yes, that's correct.
Well, you would be solving world problems if everybody worked that way.
Yeah, right? We all would, yeah.
So I'm all for that approach. Let's keep going.
Yeah, right.
So what should they consider through the lens of culture in their marketing planning and positioning?
Oh, they should do the work to figure out who they're speaking to. There's on the consumer side, there's just so much data now. Claritas has their Hispanicity model that actually breaks the consumers by 5 levels of acculturation. From the zip code level, we always take a bottom-up approach, never a top-down approach, because we think that's where the hidden secret sauce has to live, right? So if you take a bottom-up approach and at zip code level, what do these individuals look like? What languages do they speak? And you can even get data based on acculturation level. So what message would relate to someone that's a hybrid versus someone who's completely on one side of the spectrum versus the other side? None of the sides are wrong. They're just different. And so understanding those differences and then leveraging tools to market to them and to test. A/B testing always is a good thing. And then making sure you've got materials to share. I can't stress that enough. I think we still fall into this very self-reliant approach to marketing when it comes to digital. Oh, there's only one other person on the side of that device. And the more we think, no, wait, there's more. And you got to think like that when you think of B2B, right? They are buying committees. It's not always just one individual. So what is the composition of that buying committee? What do they look like? What do they read? What do they like? What do they write about? Do they have a blog? I mean, there's just so much that we can just, get all this data, collect it, analyze it, and do a better job from the beginning.
I love that. It sounds like the learning is never ending as well.
Never ending.
Yeah.
Never ending.
You got yourself into a place where you're going to, and you obviously love what you do.
I do.
You're in a spot where, you're getting to also help people and you're
Totally.
purpose driven. I looked at the company that you're also working for, and it just looks like such an incredibly passionate, purpose-driven place. And I was like, wow, this is a place I'd love to work myself. I was like, oh, sign me up.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. When I think that's the secret to life, Brian, right? When you can marry your passions with your profession, then you've got perfection. I mean, I've never looked back after going after this segment because it's, I'm always learning, to your point, always learning, and can leverage a lot of what I have learned. And it just makes such a difference. And I know consumers feel like, oh, they get me. These guys totally get me. So it makes a difference.
Yeah. And it comes through because if you're the person behind the research that's putting the the creative through that's helping that to shine through, that shows up in the message. The love that you put in is the love that's going to come out, and they're going to feel it, and it's going to create so much more through. So I'm so happy to have seen this. I want to end speaking about passions. I want to end on your books, because you let us know about your book series that you're working on, and I'd love to know about how you think about your books overall, and how it's been helpful for you professionally.
Oh yeah, thank you. Yeah, so 15 years, so it's her quinceañera. For 15 years, I have had in my head, how many of us had to be Sherpas for our parents, yet didn't have a character on TV or in the literature that depicted our authentic life experiences and could serve as our Sherpa, right? So I've had this forever. Life got in the way, like it always does. And I would write when I had time. And then finally, between COVID and my father's passing last year, I thought, you know what? I'm going to get this out. So I've developed a series for grade school kids. And the series is called Mariví, which is her nickname, Maria and Victoria, very Latino name and American name. She's an amalgamation of both. The Master Navigator series, because she's a master at navigating multiple worlds and multiple languages. And so I have the first book that I self-published a couple of months ago. I have it here. It's called School Crossing, because school is the moment where the culture clash happens. You get to school, your first day of school, and you're like, oh my God, none of these kids look like me, right? So this is her leaving her collective home, going to school in a cold building with one teacher waiting for her, and she's got a Band-Aid on her knee because she's already feeling broken. And it talks about what happens in first grade to a lot of kids. And, I'll just share with you one or two examples that I put in here. One is, she gets to school, her real name is Maria Victoria de la Paz Abascal, and yet she gets to school and her teacher says, Mary Paz, can you raise your hand? And this is her name, Mary Paz, and she doesn't even recognize her name. And it's so subtle and so huge, because for that individual that gets to school and their name gets changed because the teacher can't pronounce it or doesn't have the desire to understand how to say the name, you're basically telling that poor child, you're not worthy enough coming as you are. You need to be someone else. Right. And so that's really like the birth of all of that. And I just use examples in the book of, like, the teacher tells the kids, draw a self-portrait. And Mariví draws a portrait of her with her family at the dinner table, because she can't separate herself from the family because she's part of a collective. So the goal with the book is really to, first and foremost, to validate kids that are going through this, for them to recognize, I'm not alone. Mariví's here and she's living my life experience. And of course, Mariví has to translate and pay the cab driver and do everything for her family. And secondly, for the general market, it's written in English with a couple of words in Spanish when she speaks to her parents, and it's translated so you know exactly what she's saying, so that there can be more empathy in the world, so people can understand, the journey. None of us have the same journey, and understanding someone else's journey is critical to understanding who they are today. And if we can help each other by that, all the better. So the big surprise of this book has been that adults like me that were second generation or immigrant kids are loving it as much as the children, because we all have a latent desire to see ourselves in literature, I think. And if you didn't see yourself as a child in literature, and now you get validation because you see your life experience, it's a win-win for everybody. So School Crossing, thank you for asking.
Wow. This book, I can see how it's a culmination, not just of you, but all your work, a body of your work, a body of your family, of everything that you are. And I'm so excited for everybody to be able to see it and read it. Where can everybody find it?
Oh, they can find it on Amazon. And I actually have a website called We Are Mariví, MARIVI, because there are a whole bunch of us. So we all stand together. But
it's
it's a community. And I think there's a lot in there. I've done a couple of Zoom classes with classrooms in New York that the teachers have reached out to me and said, our classroom students are all bilingual, bicultural. And I got on a Zoom call and I was, in tears by the time it was over. All these kids telling me, I'm Marivi, the boys. I'm like, oh, that's so sweet. It's like, that happened to me. That happened to me. My teacher never knew my name either, and it's little things like that you realize, we just take so many things for granted, and we just assume so many things, and we don't know how it's impacting the person on the other side, the recipient of it.
Maria, everyone has a story.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing today.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for everything. I really appreciated this time. It went by so fast, and you have so much to offer, and I really appreciate you being on Lead Tail TV. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Brian. I appreciate it.